Well, hello. Welcome
Hello.
back to our listener. We have made it through the election.
We did.
We
Um,
survived.
we barely skidded through the finish line of the election day.
And we're still like barely through it. Like it has happened. It's not over. No one is
Yeah.
done dealing with it, but we know the results.
Yep.
Ironic theme for today.
Oh my gosh.
There's some parallels.
It's like we are living in all these drum rolls.
Yes. Get me off. I'm tired of it. Okay.
Yep.
We can talk about the election too and how it parallels, but like the idea for today is to talk about what it is like waiting for a diagnosis. So
Mhm.
I'm in the middle of a medical crisis, basically, where my blood work doesn't look normal and they don't know why. And they're running a bazillion tests on me, and some of the potential diagnoses are like not what you want to hear. And also we don't know. So I think it's similar to the election anxiety is like you just want to know. And so um because of how I am, like in this moment, I told Elisa like I would love to talk through the psychology and the philosophy of what experience is like, just because like it's an interesting way to process some of this for me and like it's still my and even though it's happening to me, I'm still like there's always a part of me that's observing what's happening to me with like interesting psychology notes, and
Mm.
it'll feel good to talk about it that way.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm here for that. I have like as a friend hearing your updates and stuff like that, I have a lot of uh, stuff where my therapist part is kind of like, you're feeling this and, normalizing some stuff, yet at the same time, challenging my like worst case scenario, time traveling and stuff like that with it. And so, yeah, for me, it's been quite a psychological process too, of just
Yes.
like, we don't know anything at this point other than you've been like really advocating for your care and like you've been like setting up so many appointments and so many things like just to make the most of the time that you have with waiting in the waiting periods, so yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Definitely like comes down to one of those coping skills of like what can I do here? What options do I have to like push for like push for my voice, make sure I'm articulating to my doctors, make sure I'm like advocating for myself, calling. One thing is like my doctor put in orders for different tests, and then I was like waiting for them to call and schedule and trying to be like polite and be like, I'm sure they'll call. I'm sure it's marked urgent. And like, no. Like one of those tests I didn't wasn't urgent, and the doctor put the order in on Tuesday, and I went ahead and called Wednesday morning to like get the ball rolling and got the rest of them. And then I waited on this one because it wasn't important. And I was like, oh, so it's a 48-hour wait if you don't call in yourself. And I was like, that's not okay. We're going
Right.
to get on the phone and call.
And the only way you could find that out is if it's happening, like if they're making you wait for no reason, like
Yeah.
it's not just like an industry standard that that you have to be like pushing stuff through, right?
Yeah, because like my doctor said on the phone, like the schedulers will call you. And so
Mhm.
you're like, okay. And like, I'm not going to wait 48 hours, if I can call central scheduling and have them do it right there. And not even being pushy, just like move yourself up in line, basically.
Mm. Yeah.
So yeah, I hear you that you're processing it too. You said earlier, like as a friend too, and the like the psychology of thinking through like worst case scenario, doomsday thoughts versus trying to stay in the moment. And that's definitely been part of this process.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, for me, like I'm kind of coming at it from a deconstruction lens because I've been in like very Pentecostal and charismatic circles that like their way of handling something like this is to say, we rebuke this spirit of illness, or we reject any type of chronic diagnosis, and kind of like using this like power to negate reality, maybe, you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of like, okay, that is part of my kind of like vocabulary in my mind of like, well, just rebuke it and like just reject it and declare that this is not a thing, I have that part of me. Then at the same time, I'm like, are you in the denial stage of grief? You know, like
Yeah.
I don't want any diagnosis for you. And
Yeah.
like I don't want so many things. And like, well, there's nothing to accept at this point because we don't have enough information or a diagnosis yet, but like I don't want so many things. And so am I like not accepting reality, Yet at the same time, I know if I were your personal assistant, I'd be making all the appointments and making all the calls. So like there is some form of acceptance there, but like just the instinct is to be like, I'm gonna put a stop to that. That's not a thing because I said, I
Yeah.
declared it. And I wish I said to my husband, I was like, I wish that were a real thing. Like, I wish that worked, And he's like, well, you wish it worked like you think it should work and stuff. And I'm like, Jennifer would beg to differ, but
Well, I've been thinking about that too, also because of like still also my background, like the answer is to pray, 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 and like almost like that personal assistant or the me that's pushing and advocating for myself with these appointments, like the instinct spiritually is like, if you ask God hard enough, this will work out,
yeah.
which doesn't make any logical sense, obvious to me. But like that's the instinct is like to just do the appointments, but then spend the rest of the time praying and praying and praying. And I don't know, I've thought a lot about that because in some ways, I think the power of positive thinking and like choosing to believe like this is going to work out. Like I will figure this out. I can handle this. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to be loved and supported and like I'm going to get the best possible care and like we will handle this. Like that releases like positive endorphins and good things and so that's good for you to believe that. Like even physiologically, I think it's good to stay in that headspace
Yeah.
for my physical body dumping worst case scenarios and living in the like anxiety. I don't think that's going to help me physically stay strong. Um, so like in one hand, like I can understand that like God's got this. He's gonna work it out for you. But on the other hand, like I think there's a spectrum of where that could be helpful and harmful.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So what has been coming up? Like, because you're like, all right, you have these paths that you could take, embracing certain teachings and stuff like that. But like, yeah, what does come up for you?
Like secular spirituality comes up for me, which is like something I've hovered on, but really in this moment, it's like I don't need to throw out the baby with the bathwater. If there's something positive that comes from the concept of prayer, which is like, I'm going to think positively about this and I'm going to believe that it's going to work out, or at least believe something that feels like not crazy or not denial, but like I can believe that like I have choice in how I handle this and like I can focus on, you can always focus on like positive things and like there's choices all along the way, even if it's the worst diagnosis, and I can choose that. Um, and I think secular spirituality is taking some of that with you, but not the toxic stuff, which to me, it feels toxic to believe that I'm required to like schmooze God up enough to get a good diagnosis. Like that feels toxic and counter logical. Why would God answer my prayer and not someone else's? Why do I have to say a next? Why do I have to have 10 people praying and someone else not have one person? It doesn't make any sense like logically that there's like a vending machine scenario here. But certainly like trusting in yourself being gratitude for, I am very, very grateful for doctors. So this kind of situation is like, I am so glad that people go to school and study medicine and have gotten so smart to figure out like test results and amazing treatment so that even if I have a bad, like terrible diagnosis, like there still are treatments I can do. And like that makes me have gratitude, hope in humanity style.
Yeah, like being alive in the present where we're experiencing the most technology than ever in humankind.
Yeah,
Mhm.
2024 is looking good for that. Like I get all my results back instantly
Mhm.
in a portal, for better or for worse. But then also, like, I already have an intake with MD Anderson. I told you, like, potentially if I need it. And they have their online portal. So all this isn't even like the medical stuff, it's just the tech stuff. But like Vanderbilt's portal has all of my I've done like 25 tests already. So it has all the 25 tests already in there. And all I did was like click a button in settings that said, do you want to um I went to the I went to the MD Anderson portal and they knew I had Vanderbilt stuff. And I just clicked a checkbox and instantly all my labs showed up in the MD Anderson portal, like
Nice.
1 millisecond.
Yeah. And you don't have to fly to Texas to have that consult. Like it can just
No.
happen in a moment. Yeah.
Yeah, like I can talk to a really awesome specialist over the internet and have her like weigh in. And she already has my labs. Like, yeah, so very, very thankful for actual doctors who work really hard in school. And I think of it too, like I know how hard it is to be a doctor and all this studying, and I'm just like, I'm so glad you guys went and did all that. You just just really appreciate it.
Yeah. 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 Gratitude is a huge thing. And like finding sparks of it like throughout any phase or like in
Yeah.
the waiting and stuff, or just like letting normal conversations happen, and feeling like there's a sense of normalcy and stuff like that, and the care. I don't know. There's stuff to be grateful for. Um, I found myself being like, so according to research, people having hope or some sort of spiritual practice or something like that equals better outcomes for treatment. It's like it's legit research.
Mhm.
And so I like hmm, this is hard. It's hard to say because like these are just like different raw parts that say stuff.
Yes.
But I was like, I have these parts that dismiss any type of spirituality except for American Christianity, basically.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh no, Jennifer has no hope of having any sort of spirituality to incorporate into this because like she doesn't ascribe to like this brand of it. Like
Uh,
I had that thought and I was like, I want Jennifer to to
that's
have
so
this
interesting.
like I want Jennifer to adopt a certain belief system so that she can have a good outcome with treatment.
Yes.
And I'm like, that's just one understanding of what like spirituality is and stuff. When at the end of the day, the only thing I want is my friend to be well. Like that's where all of that comes from. But like whether it's prayer and finding the right amount of people to pray for something or the right language, or you didn't say in Jesus name so it didn't count, like whatever all of it is, like it's just coming from a place of like I don't want this for this person you
Yeah.
know
Here.
yeah.
Like love.
Yeah.
It's love. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I I have just like so many things. And I'm like, if Jennifer reconverts for this process, like, let's do it. Let's do it.
You know, I told you I'm not
I
reconverting.
know.
Like my one thing. But I'll tell you why I feel it's so important to say that. Because I feel like one of the control mechanisms of a high control religion is you will get punished and bad things will happen to you if you don't get in line. And I am not signing up for a religion that tells people that. And so,
Mhm.
even though something hard is happening in my life, let's be real. Statistically speaking, this could happen in anyone's life. It is pretty random. Lots of people go through like medical scares. It's just part of being alive. Like we will
Yeah.
all go through this kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
like, yeah, I hate that there's a voice in my head that is like, you are rebellious. God is punishing you. And I promise you that will I'm not reconverting for that.
I was talking reconversion, like our nostalgic worship
Okay.
stuff.
Well, for hope,
Yeah.
I won't reconvert to evangelicalism, but I still believe that like mysteriously good things can happen to you. And I think that the people who are praying are also the same as the people who are saying, like, I'm thinking of you and I love you. And whatever that's sending out into the universe, like, because I'm agnostic and not atheist, I still believe that any of that could be doing something positive. Like, great, send it up, light it up.
You know how they say that like funerals and calling hours are done for like the people that go on living, and it like you're not doing a funeral for the person that passed away.
Yeah,
Like sometimes prayer can be like that. Like
yeah,
it's not so much for the person that you're praying for, but it's you like feeling helpless and stuff like that. And that's your way of manifesting like something good, for someone or like some sort of intervention, that like you can't really put your finger on, but like, who benefits from prayer? Is it the people that are praying that don't have another way to like have that outlet or and like you don't have an understanding of how stuff works when you're faced with something like this, you
yeah,
know?
I agree.
um yeah, or is it for the person? But I just found myself
Yeah.
like it's so interesting to me of like Jennifer doesn't ascribe to this brand that is right, and so the research is going to be messed up because spiritual involvement doesn't look how it should to that specific part in my mind. Like
I hear you.
what
That's
a
ingrained in me too.
what a strange thought.
It also brings my level of empathy and compassion because we talk about that. Like it heightens it because one of the weird things about this is that I feel like everyone's on this roller coaster with me, and that's okay. But I'm very aware that like this is not a lone man's journey, and that there's like a lot of people who are worried about me, and that's okay. Like I can't save anyone from that. We're all going on it together. Anyway, but knowing that and caring for the people, like I have family who's praying for me, and like in this moment, sometimes people saying I'm praying annoys me because it's sort of like the way they say it. Um, it doesn't matter to me. Like if that is bringing them, like you said, who's it for? If praying, I don't care what God you're praying to. I don't care if it's the evangelical God. Like if that's bringing someone else comfort, because this is a very out of control situation, like very out of control, very high degree of like anxiety and fear and like the unknown, no control. And so like if that brings someone comfort, my gosh, please be comfortable. Like do whatever it works, do what works for you. So I feel a
Mhm.
lot more empathy about it in this moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I would not feel good about someone saying, God has a plan. Do not come at me with God has a plan.
Well, you're like not signing yourself up for any type of spiritual bypassing,
Right.
but you're good with like the support and like the positive energy that like people are expressing to you and
I,
stuff like
yeah.
that. But doing like a psychological mind trick of like ignore, ignore what could be or ignore what's coming at you and replace it with like, some sort of thought. Like you're not up for that.
Yeah, what helps
Mhm.
me is not everything happens for a reason. Just like sometimes things happen and there's not even a reason, and we just do the best we can.
Yeah.
That is much more comforting to me than like, yeah, someone chose this for you because they thought it was best. I'm like, why? There's no reason. No one can reason me into that anyone needs to go through a medical like diagnosis crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's no amount of personal growth that that it is worth.
Yeah.
Although I do think it will equate to personal growth, whether I like it or not. I already feel that. I told Colin, I was like, no matter what the outcome, like this will change me. This is too grave, like too big of an ordeal to go through it and not be changed, regardless of the outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I was part of a really controlling church one time. And it's interesting when you leave that and like, but you can still see on social media people that are like still in, or like it's easy to be in contact with like other people that have also left and stuff like that. And that church lost a lot of people during COVID. And there was also like an accident that occurred that like, some people passed away in and stuff like that. And I ended up hearing through the grapevine that there were messages, being sent out in that community. That's like, see what happens when you leave and lose the pastor's favor. Like pointing to different people that passed away. They just left the church a year before and look what happened to them. Or like, yeah, that guy died in an accident because he left even though the pastors told him not to leave. He lost his favor. Like hearing that through the grapevine and just like really problematic teachings that happen like in the wake of existentialism. Like this is a really existentialist situation. It makes you think about your humanity and your mortality and like purposes and
Oh my
so many.
gosh, yes. Why am
Yeah.
I here?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Like last time.
My therapist. But being hearing stuff like that, like you were saying, oh, you're rebellious, so this is punishment or something like that. I
Yeah.
think it's hard for those messages not to come up, and even people start to say it's like a folk tale or something like that, you
Yeah.
know, but you're like, statistically, this could happen to anyone. Or it's like people really zoom in on, when someone leaves and they're not living in accordance with the community. So something bad happened to them instead of people that are in your community that also end up with chronic illness, or people in your community that also pass away young or unexpectedly. Like, I don't know. It's like a confirmation bias again.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
The phrase that comes up for me, hearing you say that example is like, I feel like that is severely abusive to
Yeah.
claim that a death, like of all things, like that is such a, there's nothing more painful for people to go through than death. And we all go through it, but like still losing someone. And then for someone to leverage that grief with power and control, man, it's so abusive to me.
Well, all that message does is it tells the people that are in the community, you better never leave because look what happens. And it tells people that have left the community, you better come back in because this is where it's safe here under this umbrella.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, I get you. But yeah, that message is really abusive and definitely not empathic, definitely not something that understands
Yeah.
grieving processes or freedom or anything like that.
Or statistics, or like
Yeah.
what's a mind trick. See, like when you say that, it makes me like going back to earlier when I was saying like I understand that people want to pray and that there's like that voice in our head that says like go back, maybe would say like you're being punished or going back to evangelicalism, like that's what you need to lean on if you have like a medical crisis, like go back to that. And it's like, but that belief is next door neighbors to that abusive statement to me. Like the fact that our minds even go there, like, is really messed up.
Well, it's been decades in the making. So, your mind doesn't just go there because it likes to. There's so much fear involved. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's why I
it's,
find myself even in this moment being like, what can I do that works for me? And like, I don't want to over focus on the religion and my opinions and that because like I'm focused on like being okay and like being in the moment. But even here in this moment, it still matters to me very much that like I say out loud, like, I am not playing that game with a religious system that was waiting for me to be vulnerable and saying to themselves, well, if something tragic happens, she'll come crawling back. And like, it's very important for me to clarify, no, thank you. That was an abusive system, and I'm not going to come crawling back because I don't, and because I don't need that, because secular spirituality is enough for me. Love is enough for me. Like the love and care I have from all my friends is plenty of support. The doctors and the test and the science behind treatment is plenty of support. Like I don't need that to feel comfortable that I'm taken care of.
Hmm.
I feel so strongly about that this moment.
Well, the
Oh my
perception
God.
that people were standing by waiting for this to happen.
You
Yeah, I
feel
think
like it
that's,
though?
I get why you feel that way.
Because we've heard it being said. You heard it said from a pastor. I've heard it said from friends, Bible studies, pastors all along the way.
Hmm.
I heard a very close family member say that, oh, well, when something really tragic happens in their life, they'll finally realize. And you're like, guys, that's so abusive.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. Hmm. I doubt the next thing I'm going to say is going to have like much meaning. Like, you know how you and I differ so much on
yes. And I
our
love that we
spiritual.
do.
Okay. Well, I'll just say it because this is flexible philosophy and we are flexible. But like you and I just differ so much with our views regarding like the existence of God or like his or her
Yes.
question mark, um, like intervention in human lives and stuff like that. So I kind of, regarding suffering, something that's really comforting to me is not being involved with like the human community of believers because like that's where the abuse occurs, like
Mhm.
according to my standpoint.
Yes.
So yeah, and their understanding of stuff that like they
Yeah.
possibly cannot understand. So the imagery of like God being just as surprised or just as much in suspense as we are and being just as upset and like crying about it, that to me is like a really healing perspective of like who God is and how he relates to humankind. Like being kind of like in the moment as we are. And so many people from my past would be like, that's blasphemous. They're like, what about the omniscient? You know, what about, you know,
Yeah.
God knowing past, present, and future and stuff like that? I'm like, well, I think God can be upset alongside us and, you know, be in suspense and, you know, be concerned and worried. And so, like, that belief, it takes on a different flavor when you're praying to someone that's like really upset with you and like
Interesting.
so like kind of like that bond is a lot different than, well, God, you know your good, pleasing, and perfect will, and that's gonna play out. So I'm just saying, you know, it would be great for this not to happen. You know, please change your mind if it needs changing. Like, can't tell the future versus like, what what does this mean? And like, I'm really sorry that this is happening. Like, that's what I see in Jesus in the Bible of like a real time thing of like, shoot, I don't like, it sucks. You know,
Yeah.
that's how I see him acting.
It's like, so your imagery is like a very close and emotional and like down on your level, not some like delegatory, like,
Yeah.
oh, well, I've just assigned this in the portfolio, so this is what's happening because I said it. It's like a very emotionally tuned in
Yes. Yep.
partner.
This is called like open theism. Like it's kind of like a real time interaction. Like it's Jesus wept basically, you
Yeah.
know, in a
Yeah.
nutshell of like, you know, there were many moments where Jesus was like, take this away, you know, or I
Yeah.
can't like, you know, with his friends of just like, oh no, this is really bad, you know?
Yeah.
And it's not just like, it's fine because I know what I'm gonna do. It, like, I don't know. that's kind of some imagery that I have of like God's actually weeping with me because we're upset about these circumstances that he didn't cause and we didn't cause.
Okay, well, do you want me to poke holes in your
Do it. Do it.
statement that you think we're so different? Because I feel like I'm always arguing that we're not that different, which is fun to me because, like, on the I don't know, I won't label you, but like on your end versus like my end, everyone's like, we're so different. And I'm like, I don't think we're that different. Okay. Um, this is my parallel belief to what you're saying from internal family systems
Okay.
therapy. So I had this very poignant moment. So let me give a tiny brief update for our one listener who probably already knows IFS. But the idea is kind of pulled out of Buddhism, but also just like psychology, that there's these different parts of ourselves that have their own emotions and their own fears and thoughts. But the whole tying together piece of IFS is that there's also a self with a capital S. Okay.
Mm.
And that the idea is that we all have self with a capital S and have these very human parts. And so self with a capital S, you could think of, I think, as a little bit of like divine love or presence. Whereas the parts are very human, like they get jealous and mad and angry and fears, and like they can try to protect you by hurting other people or hurting you or all these things. But the energy of self is like kind of pure and like loving and like an old wise grandma. Anyway, my favorite connection to the concept of self was when I was sitting as a therapist with a client, and the client was going through something and thinking of themselves like I had and so like I have images sometimes of like what's going on in the room, and I had this image of like someone in a rocking chair crying, and then the self was just sitting there next to them. And the thought of that was like, oh, like self is the one who sits beside. So like self doesn't have an agenda to fix it. Self doesn't have a proclamation about what it means. Self doesn't have anger or fear or sadness. Self is like it's Jesus to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But to me, and it doesn't have to be the same exact thing, but to me, there is like a spiritual element, a secularly spiritual element of like, there is a presence in my life that is bearing witness to all things and is just literally sitting there beside me, like aware.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Just using different language to describe a compassionate presence.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Good summary.
Yep. Okay.
Those
Yeah.
are both very compassionate presences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll let that marinate.
I know.
Yeah, it's so tricky. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if you are on the path of reconstruction or if you're on the path of like, I'm good where it landed, like, I think I don't know. Life's always so philosophical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be. Also,
Well, as I said that,
subliminally
I was like,
ingrained.
what was that? Sorry?
Well, like, I think some of us are more philosophically minded. I don't think everyone is thinking about compassionate witnessing.
Right. Probably not. Probably not. As I said that though, I was kind of like, okay, so we tend to operate on like the very top level of Maslow's hierarchy, like at least in this space when we're here,
For sure. I agree with you.
Yeah. So what happens when like your very bottom level is being threatened right now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like just like the security of health and, are you going to have to change where you live or like, I don't
Yeah.
know. It brings up so many questions that are just like very bottom level day to day survival stuff,
Absolutely.
And so like all of that is kind of like threatened and it might feel like it's crumbling at certain points, but you remain kind of like tapped into like the top level with like the incorporation of spirituality or like the hope aspect and stuff like that. So that to me is a really interesting phenomenon because for you, you're like, all of this is happening, but for me, it's important to talk about it. You know, let me rephrase that. You said, I'm going through all of this and it'll be helpful to talk about it, you
Yeah.
know? Okay, yeah. So I don't know. If we're talking psychology and, cute diagrams and triangles and pyramids and stuff like that to me is something, to incorporate a higher level of philosophy and thinking when you're taking care of bottom level stuff.
Yeah. I'm wondering if it's like, if you could push it into like the category too of like having this podcast conversation is another form of secular spirituality. Like this is helping me to remember, like even just sitting here with you is tapping into a part of my brain. Cause yeah, like I'm sure if you had a brain scan of me, what's lit up right now is like, am I going to live? Are my kids going to be okay? Like the worst case things are like
Mm.
very active and those thoughts keep coming. So like this is a vacation for a second. And just like maybe like prayer would be or whatever, but like it is so calming. Like I can feel my nervous system really calm right now, thinking through like the philosophy of this, the psychology, like remembering like the concept of self and like that's really calming to me because, like, I know there's little parts of me that are running around trying to survive and they've been driving the car, but like, it is very refreshing for the um the driver for the spiritual or psychological all of those like top of the pyramid things to come in the driver's seat. And I mean, it's only been like I've been doing this is like we're on day 7 of this roller coaster that feels like I feel like this has gone on for a decade. It's been 7 days. But like sometime between now and yesterday, did start thinking about like, even if this is like some really scary diagnosis, like um your question, like, why am I here? Kind of like back to like, well, then how do I want to respond and react and show up for the people that need things and have a meaning making purpose even in that season. And it was good. It was kind of a reminder of like, first of all, it's very important to me that my kids see like in a scary situation, if that happened, like I need them to see that like, hey, mom is here, like she's okay. And even like talking that like I would always want my kids to hear the most top of the pyramid access versus seeing me hysterical. And not that you can't cry and be emotional, but I just think that's what's better for them. Like they need to see this person. I don't know. Does that make sense? I've been kind of
Yeah,
struggling with it going back and forth. I don't want to spiritually bypass myself, but I also don't want to be hysterical just for the sake of it. And I think it's in some ways better collectively, especially for people that need me to see that side.
yeah. Well, I'm thinking of the book Out of Sorts by Sarah Bessey. She says that everyone needs theirs somewhere, like to have somewhere to be able to feel that and like drop that off and, something like that. And you're just kind of like, my somewhere, looks, the place where my kids are looks different than like a somewhere where like I can process the emotions or something
Yeah.
like that. And like, yeah, definitely like your kids are likely to see you cry with stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
It's likely to happen. And being gentle with yourself to be like, you know, this is a adverse situation. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Also back to like DBT, like therapy. Like, yes, I want to be real with people and not be like, this is fine. It's great and come unglued, but like I do think that there is a benefit to having choice over when, if you can, over what parts of you show up when, versus like I guess the extreme version is like someone to say like what works better for them is just to be raw all the time and unfiltered. And like, I think as I've worked through therapist land,
Mhm.
there's been feelings of like, well, I need to feel my feelings and I had to work on learning that. But then if you take it too far, it's like you have to be in your feelings all the time. And I've come like a little bit back around to like we need to feel our feelings sometimes, but it is okay to not, it's okay to shove that stuff down.
Well, okay, it's okay to acknowledge it and contain it for the time being, you know, until you're in a space like where in the service of your healing, you can get that back out, you know?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
That's what I'm trying to say.
EMDR language, trademark, trademark. um, yeah, I had this thing and I like sometimes as I'm walking with you like in this situation, I'm like, that's such a selfish thought or something like that. Like stuff sounds selfish and it's hard for me not to be judgy of like my own processing, but I was like, I I need to help Jennifer write her books that she's told me she
Oh,
wants to write. And I'm going to be Jennifer's ghostwriter and she's going
can
to
I
be talking.
leverage that out of this?
Yeah, do it. Do it. I'm like, and Jennifer is going to be laying on this couch, like a Freudian couch, and you're just going to be like sharing all of your gold nuggets of wisdom. And like, you know how like you've been wanting to teach your kid, or you have been teaching your kids like DBT skills, and like, you're like, I think interpersonal effectiveness is something that people, I'm like, I'm going to write all this down so her kids have it. Like, it, you know, and it's so hard for me because like I am thinking about losing you. Like and like it's just what having so many questions with no answers does
Yes.
in your mind. And so those have been my thoughts of like I need to dump everything out of Jennifer's brain and put it somewhere to where people can have it. You
Yeah.
know, like because I why you exist, you know, it goes back to that. I think like you exist to impart so much. And I'm like, I need access to that. And I'm going to write it down in a really cohesive way
Yeah.
because Jennifer's existence matters so much. Like that was one of my, as I commute to work or something like that. Like that was one of my things of just like feeling the powerlessness. What can I do? I can write and we're going to write it. Like, gosh. And it's like, did I ever ask you if you needed that or like if that feels supportive to you or anything? But I'm just like, we're gonna put a flash drive on there, and like
I know.
and I feel weird telling you all of that because like so much of it is rooted in like my worst case scenarios and me time traveling and like
Yeah.
you know so many things have happened and like all the water under the bridge and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But yeah, I just think about your purpose and like these
Mhm.
situations get really existentially.
No, I'm really glad you vocalized that because it's very much happening to me too. And like part of the other reason I thought it would be fun to record this for our one listener, even if we don't publish it, which I still think we can, is that like to normalize that because like you are saying you're doing that as a friend, and I'm for sure doing that of like, oh my gosh, like the pressure and the rush of like, what if I have this timeline that's like condensed all of a sudden and you just think like you've got all the time and like, what if I don't? Like, what if someone, this is like the fear people have. I think I've had this, don't we all walk around with this fear that a doctor is going to sit you down in an office and be like, well, you've got a year or 6 months or 10 years or whatever. And then everything becomes like go time. And you start to think about like, okay, like what yeah, you just put yourself in that position of like the people you care about, and like what do you do to help them if you're not there? That makes me emotional. I'm trying not to get. Yeah, just being in the waiting of a diagnosis is so torturous because you are future casting with no data. I have no data to prove that that is going to happen. I have no data to prove you're going to need to write down my legacy for me, but thank you for offering. But your brain does like, and as therapists, we try to tell people to keep a foot in the present and not in the past and the future. But like, so sorry, something like this it's like a rocket, like you've boarded a rocket and it has blasted into the future, and there's nothing you can do to stay in the present moment. Because like my brain multiple times a day is thinking through like the most basic details of like, I've got to clean out that pile of junk, you know? Or like the most significant, which is obviously my kids, which I can't even talk about without like literally will come emotionally unglued. But or the book. I can talk about that. But like, yeah, like what about the projects I was working on and like all this momentum? It just messes up everything. And then one other piece of that I thought of today that's so weird about this, because I don't have any information and I'm like on this like wait. Like I'm in this weird. Do you have a client at 2?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll wrap this up. I'll be quick. This is the last part though. Like I'm in this very weird limbo where like I am booking people out for their next session. And like of course it would be I feel very strongly that it would be not inappropriate for me to tell any clients like, well, I'm having a medical crisis and I'm doing a biopsy tomorrow and I don't know if I'm going to be your therapist. Like that does not feel ethically grounded to put on a client right now without data. So I'm just doing my job, booking them out. But every time I book someone out 2 weeks ahead, I'm like, my life is going to change one way or the other in 2 weeks. And they don't even know.
Yeah. Well, I also, from a business standpoint, it's not like you can completely dismantle your business because of a scare, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Like, that's one of those things that you have to remain in the present with because, like, I mean, you can't do kind of like an about face or like whiplash type of thing with, with that. And like, if that happens because of information and then the information changed, yeah, yeah, it's a wave that you can ride. But like, just like feeling anxious or being like anything could happen. So I'm
I
going to
know.
cancel all this and refer everyone out. Like, business wise, it doesn't make sense. And like counseling wise, it's also not in the best interest for the people.
And that's a really weird place to be. I have enough
It
information
is.
to be scared and not enough information to do anything about it right now. So if anyone else ever goes through this, I see you.
Gosh.
Thank you for doing this with me. I know this is a tough one. I feel the waves of emotion and I'm like, shut her down. But
Well, let's shut it down.
okay.
Let's eat some ice cream.
Okay.
Uh, and yeah, we'll be here for the next one.
I hope so. Let's do it next week and we'll just see what
Hmm.
that feels like. It can also be about something different. We'll see what we feel like.
Okay.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye, listener.